Labor Senator Kimberley Kitching and Liberal Senator James Paterson. James, what is China up to?
Well, Andrew, when the Australian government provides advice through DFAT and through the Smart Traveller Service to our own citizens, we do so in a dispassionate way based on evidence from around the world about the possible dangers and risks to Australian citizens when they travel abroad. If you go to the website and you read it, you'll see it's very factual, it's very to the point, there's no politics in it. And clearly, circumstances in both Hong Kong and mainland China have changed, not just in recent months, but over a number of years. And that necessitated an update to Australians to advise them that they are at risk now, we believe, of arbitrary arrest and detention, because that's something that's happened to citizens of other countries like Australia, including Canada. What China has now done in response is just a transparent attempt at disinformation. There is no evidence that Chinese people visiting Australia, or indeed the 1.2 million people of Chinese descent who live in Australia very happily, peacefully and safely, are at any risk at all. In fact, Australia is probably the safest place for them to be in the world, including in China. And so what China is trying to do is distract from that embarrassing advice that was given by the Australian government and put it back on us, but it is a transparent attempt at disinformation from the CCP, which they are well accustomed to.
Kimberley, our travel advice, I think, was even more justified by the fact that China has a record of using foreign citizens, arresting them and using them as hostages in negotiations with other governments. And we've seen exactly that. 2 Canadian businessmen been arrested now for a year and a half in China because China's got a dispute over Canada having arrested a Huawei executive.
The CFO of Huawei. I mean, we have a rule of law. We have a values-based system. We do not engage with the world in this way. And I think, unfortunately, this is, today's statements out of the Foreign Ministry in Beijing is yet another in a long line of bellicose statements. I mean, to say that our law enforcement agencies would arbitrarily, seize, search citizens or Chinese citizens or, seize their possessions. I mean, our law enforcement agencies are highly regarded and highly professional. They do not engage in that kind of behaviour, and neither do we as a country. But I mean, I think, Andrew, what we're seeing is these statements, the upping of the ante. But what we do know is that China is a country with global ambitions, and with that comes the responsibility to act in a way that follows international rule of law, international legal systems, international trading systems. That's what we expect.
I know we expect it, and that's what's so surprising. I don't see that China's threats are working, and yet it's getting so bellicose. Oh, maybe they are working, James, because, for instance, China hates Taiwan. Threatens countries that recognise Taiwan as an independent country. China says, no, it's a rebel province, it's ours, and we will take it back. But yet we see Germany's Foreign Affairs Ministry giving in to all this bluster and bullying, removing Taiwan's flag on its website, removing it, even though it's got the flag of Palestine there, which is not even a country. China really is gradually remaking the world to its liking, as Clive Hamilton argued in his latest book.
Andrew, I think it's very unwise for any government, Western or otherwise, to give in to any of these threats of intimidation or economic coercion or rhetorical bullying that comes out of the Chinese Foreign Ministry now on a daily basis, and all the state-backed organs like Global Times and others. It is designed to get political compliance. It is designed to exert political control, and if it's successful, it will continue, and in fact it will be escalated, and the demands for control will only grow and grow. The only way to deal with that kind of attempt of influence in our domestic politics and our sovereign affairs is to resist it in a determined way, and not allow anybody to dictate to us about what we do here in our country and what our relations are with other countries around the world. So I think it is a mistake to give in to that kind of behaviour.
Well, someone should tell the German Foreign Affairs Ministry to pull its head in. Kimberley, I want to ask you about Black Lives Matter, and well, I doubt that you're going to be surprised by this. Maybe you are, I don't know. To me, it's a racist movement. It's triggered so much violence and mayhem. Its finances and some of its fundraising is actually managed by an activist group, 1,000 Currents, which is sponsored by a charity set up by the Kellogg's founder of your breakfast cereal. It has a woman, Susan Rosenberg, sitting on its board of directors, on deputy head, once arrested for her ties to a radical left terrorist group responsible for killing police and bombing. Here she is.
I just never stopped wanting to make revolution, but I was in possession of explosives and weapons when I was arrested in 1984.
Now, Rosenberg was sentenced to 53 years prison, was pardoned after 13 by President Bill Clinton's last day in office, now helping Black Lives Matter. What does that tell you?
Well, I think it's not appropriate to have someone who is a convicted terrorist on a board of an organisation that, you know, one of its aims, stated aims, is to engage in peaceful protest against police brutality against African Americans. So I think it is inappropriate, partly because of what she did. I mean, it is inexcusable, really, what she did. But I think also because it would overshadow any message that that organisation is trying to put out, or its aims that it's trying to achieve. So I think there are many, many people who could contribute to that movement, and I think, you know, to overshadow it with someone like Susan Rosenberg is really, it's not appropriate.
But to that point, James, one is there's Rosenberg, Marxist, convicted, terrorism offences. One of the three co-founders was on tape. We've played it on this show, saying they were trained Marxists themselves. It's hardly like she's, you know, you've got this pure movement over here and just this one person who's a you know, bad look over there. I think it's a real problem, and I just wonder why so many people bend the knee to a movement led by such extremists.
Probably, Andrew, because most people are well-intentioned. Black Lives Matter as a standalone concept is an intuitively appealing thing. Of course, Black Lives Matter, and of course there have been problems with police violence in the United States and elsewhere in the world, including in Australia. But the Black Lives Matter movement has very quickly transformed to be much more than that. It's effectively been colonised by the far left politics. They have much more radical aims than just standing up for the rights of black citizens of the United States, who want to dismantle the police, who want to redistribute wealth, who have wacky ideas about justice and reparations and fundamentally changing the character of the United States of America. And yet many people in big companies, in the media elsewhere, are still attached to that initial appealing concept and sympathetic concept and haven't kept up to date with what it's really become. And I think probably are fearful of taking on what it has become because others will say, well, then you're against black lives and you say that black lives don't matter.
That's correct, you're a racist. If you point out, they're a communist, you're a racist. Exactly. Kimberley, quickly before we go, Gladys Berejiklian is struggling with what all premiers, you know, do we clamp down on everything and just try to have no infections at all, or do we try to let the economy get up off its feet, employ more people and risk more infections? What is the right balance in your view?
I think it's very difficult. I think all governments are struggling with arriving at that balance. New South Wales is obviously going to identify, it has identified hotspots. It's going to try to clamp down in those areas, and obviously has introduced more fines today as well for restaurants and pubs, in terms of if rules are breached. We have to try to get a grip on this. Obviously, the infection rate in Melbourne has gone up today from the figures today.
I know.
It's hard to
shock.
get.
I know,
but,
it's a standing warning to all premiers, actually. Oh, look, before I go, I'm sorry, James, I should come back to you, but Kimberley is the Francophile here. It's July 14, Bastille Day. Can you explain to me, Miss Francophile, Miss French speaker, why the French mark a day which marks when they killed all these people guarding the Bastille, let out 7 people, only 7 prisoners were there, some of them half mad, didn't want to leave. started a revolution that killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands, had to be ended by a dictator, Napoleon, who started wars of aggression that killed, what, 15 million people? And the French say, yes, that's us. Explain to me.
Well, you know, the French are sometimes thought of as very counter-suggestible, but I think that it obviously is, is a way of their celebrating or their acknowledging that, in fact, their system did change, and what we did see from those changes, and yes, there was incredible upheaval in Europe, both social and political, and obviously territorial as well. What we do see is that they celebrate those a change in their system. Now, obviously, they did go
running
well.
with
In fact,
blood.
their national anthem celebrates that and talks about the blood being shed. But
it's incredible. I don't get it,
it's
Kimberley, and I see you're struggling with it. James, I'd love to hear your views on it, but I've run out of time. I've got to gloat over the latest dismissal conspiracy theory
Vive la France.
going poof into thin air. James Paterson, Kimberley Kitching, thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew.